Hi, my name is Ken Davis and this is the Ken and Phil's Health Safety Podcast. This is a podcast that's aimed for our partners and supply chain and giving them a little bit of access to informal health and safety chats and informal health and safety topics. Welcome to the first podcast, Phil. Thanks very much for stepping in and
no problem. Thank you for having me, Ken.
Helping me out and trying to get the good word out there to the great British public. This first podcast I'm going to call The Act That Changed Our Lives.
Brilliant.
Do you know what act I'm referring to, Phil?
I would expect that you're referring to the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974.
Exactly. 50 years old next month.
Wow, 50 years old.
Yeah, 50 years old next month. So essentially, where did it all start? Just to give you a bit of background, a very clever man called Lord Robens, back in 1969, was asked by the Prime Minister of the day to go and sort of have a look at the amount of accidents that were happening in the workplace. Because back in 69, the UK was pretty much in the dark ages when it comes to health and safety. And this brilliant bloke took 5 years to come up with this magnificent piece of legislation. I have to say it's still the most important piece of legislation in health, safety and welfare that we have today. So, it'll never go out of date because of the way he wrote it.
Can I just ask, when you say immediate benefits to people and country, how would you define that in relation to what was going on at that time in relation to health and safety?
It's a great question. Essentially, almost overnight. Now, when I say overnight, I mean within a few months or years, the accident rates and ill health rates within the UK were halved. Mm-hmm. So consequently, the governments of the day started to realise that having less accidents in the workplace means the business works more efficiently, and makes more profits, and obviously, I'm sure there was a moral element in there as well, but obviously,
absolutely.
Go on.
Also, I'd say that the key emphasis is on, if you get good staff, is making sure that you look after those staff, because in reality, once you train those staff, they become an asset to the business.
Well, they are your most valuable asset, aren't they? Yeah. And obviously, training them and getting them where you want them, and working for you in the way that you want them to work for you, the last thing you need is those key people being injured. So I think it was very apparent literally by 1976 that this is something that all businesses should be considering. Sadly, our European counterparts took a further 15 years to negotiate around the table at Brussels to come up with something similar.
So we were ahead of our time, really.
We are, and we still are. I hate to say it, but don't like to blow our own trumpet, but the UK is head and shoulders above any other country in the world in terms of health safety management. But just to make the point about the 15 years that it took Europe to come up with something similar, when you consider the standards of health and safety abroad, you just wonder how many people's lives could have been saved if they'd have expedited a piece of similar legislation, or even just used our 74 Act as the gold standard and just adopted it, because there must have been hundreds of thousands of people injured.
It would have been interesting if you could have some statistics from the early days before the Act came in relation to the number of deaths.
Yeah, it would be, but I haven't got time to do that. Okay, so let me just give you a brief overview then of the way the law works in the UK. So we have the Act.
Yes,
it's the principal piece of legislation. Okay, and as I've said, it's a marvellous piece of legislation which will always be where it should be. Below the Act, we have a secondary piece of legislation which is called the regulations. So regulations feed into the Act. Both of those pieces of law, the Act and regulations, are on the statute book, so it's a criminal offence not to comply. Then we have...
Can I just... When you say it's a criminal offence in relation to who would be at fault?
Yeah, it's interesting. a lot of people think health and safety is dealt with in a separate little court dealing with minor sort of issues. Well, it's not. Breaches in health and safety law, i.e. non-compliance with the 74 Act or a regulation, could lead to unlimited fines in a criminal court and imprisonment. So it's no different to breaching health and safety law than it is to burglary or assault. You know, it's dealt with in exactly the same court. There is a tertiary level, although it's not on the statute book. We then have acts, regs, and then approved codes of practice. Thankfully, we have a HSE in this country, which are brilliant and are always producing us things called ACOPs, which are essentially a layman's version of what the law says.
So would I be right in saying it's like best practice?
Yeah. So when you read the statutory instrument, and I don't recommend anybody do that because it's gobbledygook to most people, but when you read the statutory instrument, it's written in legal speak. Legal people will understand that, but people like you and I and employers who we're trying to get this podcast out to won't. So the HSE generate for every regulation a guide, an approved code of practice on what the law requires the company to do, but it's written in plain English so we can all see exactly what is required. And there is even a fourth level of legislation, I suppose. Again, not on the statute book, but we've got the Act as the principle. Secondary was the reg. Tertiary was the ACOP, and then we have guidance notes.
Yeah.
And there is a guidance note on anything.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to know about, what's the guidance on the slippiness of corridors in the city of Wolverhampton College, the HSE will have a guidance note on that.
Yeah, okay. So you mentioned a little earlier about the HSE. I think a good point is to try and get people to understand the role of the HSE within the work environment.
Yeah, so very soon after the 74 Act, the HSE were given legal powers, and within the law in the UK now, they are, without a shadow of a doubt, the most powerful of all civil servants. They can do pretty much anything. They can enter your business, they can take away samples, they can carry out investigations, they can ask for facilities like a room like this to be housed for a few days while they're conducting their investigation. They can stop your work. They can actually say, right, until we get to the root of the accident.
Am I right in saying if they feel that there's an immediate risk to life, they can actually close your business?
They can, yeah. If they are investigating an accident and they're unsure whether or not that accident could happen again, well then, business will cease until they've obviously got to the root cause. And there's been lots of examples of that in the past. Below the regulation then, so remember we've talked about the regs, then obviously, the 74 Act, we then have the regulations, and the most important regulation we have is the management regs. So the management regs was what essentially came down through Europe in 1992, and it was revamped in 99. And that is, again, it has an ACOP, so don't worry, you don't have to read the statutory instrument. And it was that regulation that formalised the need for risk assessment and stuff like that, which is basically what all health and safety legislation in the UK is based on, risk assessment. So if you've got a significant risk and it's foreseeable, you've got to write it down if you employ more than 5 people.
Can I just ask you a question there? Do you run any type of risk assessment training courses in your programmes?
Funny you should say that. I was with Beezer yesterday delivering a free 3-hour session on risk assessment. So we have lots and lots of health and safety courses, from sort of introductory half-day sessions right the way up to level 6 high degree stuff. So, and everything in between. So you can find out all of what
something that I've always wanted to clarify. So the person doing a risk assessment, do they have to be a trained person?
Well, they've got to be competent. They've got to be deemed competent. And I don't want to go into too much detail here because obviously we will do a podcast on risk assessment at a later date. But just to answer the question, you've got to be familiar with the risk.
Yeah.
You've got to understand the risk, and you've got to obviously know how to fill in the paperwork, the risk assessment template.
Yeah.
If you know those two things, you'll be deemed competent at doing risk assessments. But it really does depend on you, the individual, and how much you know about the business and that location.
Okay.
So before we obviously sort of, this is only a short sort of podcast, so I'd really like to talk to you about Section 2 of the 74 Act, which is titled The Duties of the Employer to the Employee.
Can I just ask you a question there? So the 74 Act is broken down into two areas, one being the employer and the other one being the employee.
Well, there's a lot of different regulations within the Act. Many different regulations.
So if you go if you go
every regulation deals with not just the employer but the employee's responsibilities.
Correct. So if you go into a company and they say who is responsible for health and safety, I'll go into a lot of world-class manufacturing companies, and quite often they'll, as soon as you go through the door into the production area, they'll have a mirror saying who is. It's everybody. So everybody is responsible for health and safety in relation to monitoring, measuring it, and also recording any issues or problems. But the responsibility for sole responsibility or what you would call duty of care relies with the.
Okay, well, as you've probably answered your own question. Health and safety is everybody's responsibility, but clearly you can't have the people sort of like mopping the toilets being ultimately responsible for health and safety. Everybody has a part to play.
Yeah.
The buck stops with the senior person on site. Yeah. That's basically the way it is, and that senior person obviously needs to ensure that there's resources, there's technical abilities to discharge their legal duties as a legal minimum.
Yeah.
But obviously businesses like blue chip companies, world-class companies, they're going to be striving for industry best practice, not just legal minimum.
No.
Yeah.
So another question I'm keen to ask you from an employer, how do you as a health and safety professional see proactive and reactive within an organisation? So we talk about defining a culture.
Are we talking about monitoring here?
Yes.
Yeah, you've got to do a bit of both.
Yeah.
And again, that may be something that we can discuss in a podcast or another day. But proactive monitoring, obviously, we're referring to your inspections, the sort of front end stuff. Stopping things happening before they could cause an accident. And your reactive is counting things that have gone wrong: accidents, dangerous occurrences, near misses.
Yeah.
So a bit of both.
Okay.
So to get to the most important section then of the 74 Act, generally considered Section 2, the employer's duties to the employees. Let me just read some of those key things out, which as employers you need to know about. If you can say, yes, we're doing most of these, or all of these, I should say, or we're achieving all of these, I think you as an employer are doing what you need to be doing. So it talks about must provide and maintain safe plant and equipment.
Yeah,
that's pretty straightforward, isn't it?
It is, but what act would that will cover that, Ken?
Well, let's stick with the 74 Act.
Okay.
You're absolutely right. There is other regulations, the provision and use of work equipment regs that deals with sort of hardware. But, this is the genesis of where Pure came from. This is why I love it, why it's a magnificent piece of legislation. That provide and maintain safe plant and equipment. So everything that you use, whether it be a table and chair, right the way through to a screwdriver or an oil refinery, it's got to be well maintained so it doesn't give rise to risk.
Yeah.
So you can't give your employees bits of kit that are held together with a little bit of blue tack. Or
I'm sure if you look round this room that we're in now, you'll see that most of the electrical stuff has got a PAT test in.
All of it, I hope.
Yeah.
Yeah. So machinery, tooling, it's got to be sort of well maintained.
Yeah.
Because this is where accidents happen. Remember, Lord Robens identified where the big groups of accidents were being sort of were happening. Clearly, people using deficient, inappropriate poorly maintained work equipment were having lots of accidents. It then goes on to say, you must ensure safe use, handling, storage and transportation of articles and substances. And getting a little bit legal speaky there.
Yep.
Obviously, substances we could probably argue is dealt with COSH these days.
Yeah.
Control of substances hazardous to health.
Yeah.
Handling of storage, though, that was talking about manual handling.
Yeah.
Again, probably sort of defunct in most of its areas, that particular one, but nonetheless worth mentioning. Third, provide the necessary information, instruction, training and supervision. I mean, if you, as an employee, know about the hazards you're being exposed to, there's a pretty good chance you aren't going to be exposed to them.
Yeah.
There's a pretty good chance you're going to ensure that you know that they're dangerous and you ain't going to be exposed to any particular issues. I have to say, in all the time I've been a health and safety professional or working in industry or in the college, that's the big one when it comes to accident investigation.
Yeah.
Inappropriate information, lack of
Yeah.
expertise, etc. It goes on to say, ensuring a safe place of work, including safe access and egress. So when you turn up for work and you park your car on the car park, you've got to be able to get to work, your office, without having to sort of step over a pothole or, walk over a spoil heap, step over trailing cables or spillages in the car park. So remember, it's not just while you're on site or while you're in the factory or in the actual sort of the tool room or wherever it is you're working. You've got to be able to get to and from. Provide and maintain a safe working environment with adequate facilities. So this is obviously talking about welfare now.
Yeah.
So you can see it's brilliant. I mean, obviously it's repealed now by the Workplace Health, Safety and Welfare Regs, but 50 years ago we were saying you've got to provide adequate facilities, wash facilities, drinking water, toilets.
Yeah, and I think what's evolved from that, if you look at what's going on now in relation to a lot of companies are working extended shifts in relation to days, nights and continental shifts. So obviously we need to make sure that we are making sure that our people are well looked after and catered for.
Yeah, absolutely. And the last one I want to mention just briefly is consult with recognised safety representatives, because we need to be aware that no longer do you need to be a recognised member of a trade union. Okay, so you can be a safety rep within your business. Okay, if 2 or more people request that.
Yeah.
So safety reps are a good thing, but you don't no longer have to be a member of a trade union. Obviously, 50 years ago, it was a slightly different landscape, wasn't it? Everywhere was a closed shop. Yeah. So, just to summarise this podcast then, it's the best thing since sliced bread. If you understand your health and safety responsibilities in terms of the 74 Act, again, I'm not going to ask anybody to read it to the nth degree, but if you understand Section 2 as an employer, you're a heck of a long way down the road of making sure you're achieving legal minimums.
Yeah.
So, sign off. Thanks very much, Phil. You've been a tour de force. Any other questions?
No problems, Ken. I look forward to discussing our next topic.
Hi, thanks very much for having us. Hope you've enjoyed our podcast today. Ken and Phil's health and safety podcast. Obviously, it's designed for our suppliers and our partners to get access to health and safety and more formal training if you need it. You can reach us on our website, which is www.wolfcoal.ac.uk.